So I'm just going to give everything a moment, and then I'm going to start with some introductory comments. Okay, it looks like we're good to start here today. So I just want to start by saying hello and welcome to today's conversation with Marta, Naomi, and Becca from our Urban Design Awards jury. Mia is not able to join us today. I'm going to let our moderators, Cynthia and Neil, introduce our panelists in just a minute. Just want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Peter Speary. I'm the Urban Design Lead here at the City of Edmonton. And I also just like to make a short land acknowledgement. The City of Edmonton acknowledges the traditional land on which we reside in Treaty 6 territory. We'd like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked the territory for centuries, such as the Niheo, Dene, Anishinaabe, Nakota Iska, and the Niitsitapi peoples. We also acknowledge this as the Métis homeland and home of one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. For me, I grew up on Treaty 1 land in a place the Cree people called Muddy Water. I trained there as a landscape architect and was imbued with both a curiosity and deep respect for the land. I really hope that even in some way, small way, that today's conversation feeds your own curiosity and respect for the land in which you live and work, wherever that might be. Our webinar today is not just a part of Edmonton Design Week, but it's also part of the 2023 Urban Design Awards program. More information on the awards can be found here at www.edmonton.ca/Urban Design Awards. We are doing a live stream today, but if you do have questions for our panelists, you can send them to us here at urbandesign@edmonton.ca, and we'll do our best over the course of the hour to feed those questions to our panelists. So before I pass things off to our moderators, I just want to do a very short introduction. Cynthia Devell is the founder of Avid Architecture and the Alberta and Northwest Territory Board of Director with the RAIC. Her favorite aspect of her work is helping people feel good by supporting a deeper connection with oneself. And Neil Lamontagne is a city planner and the faculty lecturer in the University of Alberta Planning School. He's also active in our local design community as a board member of Media Architecture Design Edmonton and the Edmonton Design Committee. I'm going to pass it off to Neil and Cynthia to start the conversation.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm going to introduce each of our very talented and incredible panelists to start, and then each of them will give you an introduction to themselves and their work right after. Marta Farvag is an urban planner and founding principal at PFS Studio in Vancouver. She's worked on many complex urban multidisciplinary projects over her career. She is a fellow with the Canadian Institute of Planners and an honorary member of the BC Society of Landscape Architects. Her areas of expertise include large-scale master plans for university campuses and major parks, design guidelines, heritage resource planning, programming of public space, commercial area revitalization, and public engagement. She has taught and been a guest critic at the University of British Columbia's School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, and has served on a number of advisory boards, including the Vancouver Heritage Foundation and the Vancouver City Planning Commission, and on many award juries, including ours. She is currently on the board of the Urbanarium, a Metro Vancouver nonprofit organized to stimulate civic engagement and dialogue toward the goal of intelligent city building. Becca Taylor is an artist and curator. She is a registered member of the Fisher River Cree Nation in Manitoba and was born and raised in Amiskwaciwa, also known as Edmonton. Becca's practice involves investigations of kinship and constellations of relationships that make up Indigenous communities, with a particular interest in food sovereignty, harvesting, and witnessing through deep listening, conversations, and making. Becca has curated exhibitions across Turtle Island, notably co-creating the fourth iteration of La Biennale d'Art Contemporain Autochtone with Nikki Little. Most recently, Becca participated in a curatorial consortium for program Crossing, Itineraries of Encounters at the Blackwood Gallery, contributing the second set, Living Memories, in 2021. Becca is the inaugural director of Otsisiwan Contemporary Art Center in Amiskwaciwa, Alberta. She is currently on leave of absence to complete her MA in curatorial practice at the University of Winnipeg. And finally, Naomi Minja is a registered architect who has called Edmonton home for the last 30 years. During this time, she has practiced architecture and held positions as a director with Dialogue, a national multidisciplinary design firm, as executive director of the Alberta Association of Architects, and most recently as the regional manager of project management for public service and procurement at Canada's Western region. Naomi has played a key role in a number of architecture and design-related initiatives, such as co-founding the Prairie Design Awards program, a founding committee member for the Examination of Architects in Canada, and was an organizer for the biannual Banff session. Today, she continues her involvement as a member of the Canadian Architectural Certification Board's Broadly Experienced Foreign-Trained Architect Review Committee, along with providing mentorship to architectural students and interns. In 2012, Naomi was awarded a fellowship in the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada for her contributions to the profession. So, a warm welcome to our panelists, and we will welcome them to the stage.
Beginning with Marta.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing the other presentations. I was encouraged by the organizers to have a fairly personal approach to my initial presentation. So I've taken advantage of that, and I've found that sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting my sharing working here. There, it seems to be going. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, good. So I thought I'd take a quick explanation of how I got to where I am now and how my firm got started and the work that we've done along the way. I was very fortunate when I first came to Vancouver as a young college graduate to be asked by my father-in-law, who was a planner, to do some work for him. And I had not encountered the profession of urban planning as an undergraduate, but was quite intrigued by what he was doing and the large-scale land planning and neighborhood design work that he was doing. And he encouraged me to attend a lecture at UBC that was given by Ian McHarg, who for me, is one of the most inspirational planners of our time. He is the author of a book called Design by Nature. And he encouraged planners to have the land be the clue and the guiding understanding of the land for all planning projects. And that's been a touchstone for me throughout my career and caused me to be interested in both landscape architecture and urban planning. And as a result, I've pursued that. So shortly after I worked for my father-in-law, I was able to get a job in a planning firm, went to planning school, and then on graduation from planning school, I pursued a job with the one firm in Vancouver at the time that did both planning and landscape architecture, a firm called the ICOS Group. And there I worked with Chris Phillips, who has now gone on to be my business partner for all those years since, over 40 years. And here we are on the cover of Awards magazine back in 1999, when our firm was still called Phillips Fairbanks Molenberg. Since that time, we've grown. We now have 2 offices. We had 3. We had one in Shanghai, which has recently been closed down. And these little red dots represent the project work that we've done across the world. We now have 3 young new partners who've taken the lead in the firm, and us older ones have been able to step back and focus on project work, which is frankly a lot more fun than the business side of running a consulting firm. And the picture on the left is the 3 of us a few months ago at a presentation at the BCSLA conference on the firm's history. There are several projects, when I look back at how Phillips Fairbanks Molenberg evolved, that were really keystone projects for us that transformed our opportunities and capacity. So I thought I'd mention them because in looking over the many, many projects we've done, these always stand out in my mind as very key ones. One is the master plan we did for Hastings Park. Hastings Park is the 2nd largest park in Vancouver. It's in the very northeast corner of the city. And it was a very derelict place when we first were engaged to work on it. Mostly parking lots and the remains of what used to be a major exhibition site, but had really turned into sort of a third-rate playland and not very interesting place, very ungreen. And a group of citizens around the park lobbied very hard to have it transformed into a much greener and more year-round destination park, allowing the exhibition to happen for 17 days of the year, but also thriving as a place for the community in the meanwhile. And what was transformative for me in the process of winning the chance to do the first master plan for the park, which involved a very substantive public engagement process, but also to then stay involved with the park to deliver a number of phases of the development. And that involvement has continued to today, where PFS is working on one of the elements of the master plan, the renewed outdoor concert facility, which will be open in a couple of years and provide the one large place where loud music concerts can still happen in the city of Vancouver, as so many of our outdoor venues have been shut down or transformed due to residential development around them. A second project that is really a keystone for our firm was that we won the opportunity to redesign Confederation Square in Ottawa. It was a real fluke that this happened because at the time we were a much smaller firm and had never been able to establish much of a presence outside of British Columbia. But I think the reason that we were able to win this job in part was the talented work of Greg Smollenberg, who ran this project, but also one of the criteria that the federal government imposed on it was that you had to have done several million-dollar projects within the last 3 years. And this was awarded at the height of the recession, and all the East Coast firms found it hard to qualify. This is really an amazing transformation of an area that was really a major intersection of roads, but didn't allow people to connect. And what it's done is created pedestrian connections up and down and under, and become a really important place in Ottawa. And the third project that I want to talk about briefly as a transformative project in our office, but particularly also in my work. This is what is now Lansdowne Park. This is the before picture. Lansdowne Park, much like the Pacific National Exhibition site, was an exhibition site that had become mostly parking lots and a couple of stadiums. PFS submitted and won an international design competition. This was our presentation drawing for that competition entry, and we were selected in part because of the compelling graphics for the project, but also because our project stressed the programming of the park, and the programming of the park for all 4 seasons, something that's really important in Edmonton, I know, to have winter programming as well as summer programming. And our vision also considered how First Nations would be represented at the park. It also set out to work with the communities of Edmonton to make sure that the programming of the park was successful. And this is a picture of the park as it's now built out. And the really important piece for me was I was engaged on the team to talk to all the people in the area about programming, and the programming has been so successful, day, night, and winter. And finally, I'd like to wrap up with just a personal thought or two that's been triggered by my interest in Edmonton Design Week and how great it is to see Edmonton doing so much to engage its community in conversations about urban design. Many years ago, back in the mid-'80s, I met this group of people on the right. They were a group of architects, and Richard Henriquez, an architect advisor, and they set out to have an architecture lecture series. We got funding, and I was invited to join. And for a number of years, we had great fun inviting architects and other designers from around the world to come and speak in Vancouver. And we also hosted several competitions, including one called Sea Change, about making the waterfront more interesting, and one called the Vancouver Special Competition, which was a way to look at the Vancouver housing form that was dominating residential development at the time, the Vancouver Special, and make it more interesting. And this same group of people, many of them have continued to be involved, have now created this group called the Urbanarium, which was mentioned in our introduction. We have a lot of fun and also work hard to bring a civic discourse to people in Vancouver. One of the things that we've done is host design competitions again, building on our experience from all those years ago. Two we've had that are now completed are the Missing Middle competition and the Mixing Middle competition. The Mixing Middle to bringing mixed use into single family areas. And our new one coming up, about to be launched, is called Decoding Density, which is going to look at the 6-story apartment form, which the city of Vancouver is now inviting to be built across the city in the Broadway plan and also in the Vancouver plan, and how to make it more interesting, engaging, and livable for the people who will have the opportunity to live in them. So that's a quick and much compressed romp through my career. Thank you.
It was wonderful to see actually a lot of familiar folks in the urbanarium photo, and some highlights of a remarkable career that still is going strong. I know we've worked together a few times. I've always been inspired. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to Becca Taylor.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm also going to try to share some images. Is everybody able to see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. Tansei. My name is Becca Taylor. I'm a Cree, an Irish artist and curator based in Nimiskutsi again. My family comes from Fish River Cree Nation, which is in Manitoba. And then my Irish relatives come from Cork in Ireland. I'm just going to share a little bit about my practice. Primarily, I'm going to be focusing primarily on my curatorial practice today. And kind of, yeah, how I kind of entered into this. So I started curating back in 2016. That's something that just kind of like fell into my lap, honestly. I had never really intended on curating, but I was invited by Urban Shaman Gallery in Winnipeg to curate something for them. And it really kind of opened up a whole new door for me. And it was something that I found really exciting and engaging. I've always really loved thinking about how bodies move through space, and to have an opportunity to curate an exhibition and work with contemporary artists and kind of think about how audiences flow within gallery spaces was a really exciting challenge for me to kind of take on. And as I kind of moved within my curatorial practice, I started really thinking about outdoor spaces more, and how bodies move through urban spaces and the relationship we have to the different elements within them. As an Indigenous person, I grew up like a lot. Like I grew up in here in Edmonton. So I definitely identify as like an urban person, but I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time rurally. My father practices hunting and gathering. So we were really privileged to be able to spend a lot of time like out onto the land, learning how to track animals and find water sources and build relationships up with the plants and animals kind of in these areas. And that has definitely really influenced the way I think about intention within the kind of the projects and that I curate and work on. So this first image here that I'm sharing was actually the curatorial residency. It was the residency at Common Opulence that Peter von Tiesenhausen, who's an artist up in Demet, Alberta. This is on his land and the residency that he runs up there. And in 2018, Nikki Little, who is a frequent collaborator of mine, and I hosted a residency that we invited 8 artists to participate in. And I'm sharing this image because it kind of really changed the way I started thinking about how we're presenting work within these spaces. And a lot of the way I was kind of raised is you don't want to leave a huge impact on the land. You want to be able to remove these items easily, or to have it kind of be taken back by the earth, Mother Earth, so it's not creating any harm. And a lot of this residency was in alignment with a lot of those kind of conversations that I had grown up with. So what we really loved about this residency is that each group that comes in every year builds something to leave out there to be used by the community as it kind of grows. And we were doing this residency based on hunting and migration. So we ended up leaving this smoke shack that we had built, and everything we built was on materials that we could find in and around the land. And a lot of our communal meals at the end of each day were actually a lot of what we could find and harvest ourselves. And it was really exciting to see the work that the artists created, because this work wasn't necessarily going home with them, but it was meant to stay on the land and kind of disintegrate, over time. And so it became a very temporary element within these spaces. And then also, being in such a rural area, there's a lot of folks who may never see it outside of its documentation, which I thought was also another really interesting element within it. That kind of led to the project that I worked on for the Blackwood Gallery. So when I was invited into this space to curate something, I was thinking a lot about this documentation, about these gestures we were leaving on the land, or this relationship we were building with these materials that aren't meant to exist long-term, but maybe a little bit more temporary or transition over time. So, and just thinking about this space, so the Blackwood Gallery is in Mississauga at the university. So I started really thinking about the architecture of the space, and have never had been there myself. This was during the pandemic I curated this, so I was getting sent a lot of images. And I just really started thinking about this concrete landscape that a lot of these students are moving through to get to different classes. So I was really interested in kind of thinking about these moving rurally again, thinking about the landscape. And what I later found out about the university, it is actually quite, so it does feel quite rural in compared to some of the other universities I've experienced. So I thought that was kind of like interesting. Like I said, had never been there. I was just really taken back by this like concrete images that they're sending me. So these were light boxes. And this work here is by Aseniak and Camille Asher. And they were actually a part of the residency. So this is one of the works that they created during that residency. And it's called This World Here, Nesting. I'm just going to focus for the last little bit on some projects that I had worked on over the summer. And they're all located here in Amiskwaciwâskahikan and Edmonton. So I was really privileged to be invited to be a part of this curatorial team to select the artist to be invited in to do the TELUS bus station public artwork. And it was really beautiful conversations with these other curators, and we were talking a lot about the power of that space, the history of that space, kind of that erasure of Indigenous histories, especially in that area. So we all kind of identified really quickly that we wanted to work with Michelle Sound, whose family is actually descendants from Papa Chase. And we were really drawn by her work in particular because it speaks so much to her family and the history in Treaty 6 and this like forced removal and the way colonization has impacted the land and the way that we gather. So in this image, and I apologize, this is not the best image. I had to find one this morning, but in the center there is a map of Papa Chase. And on either side of that is a historical image taken around the same area. You can see there's a bunch of teepees and people gathering. And then on either side of that is different landscape images that she took from different spots her family frequented or her family currently lives and resides. And with each of these images, there's rips and tears that she is repairing with a lot of our traditional practices, beading, quill work, tufting, and to kind of show that this continuous harm of colonization on the land in our communities, and then her attempts to repair them with a lot of our Indigenous worldviews and methodologies. So as I said, I'm the director of the One Contemporary Arts Center here. Something we were really privileged to be able to get this building back in 2020. And we did work with RPK Architects to present this building. And over time, we've added these 2 murals to it. But something that's like always been really important to the way we practice, because while we have this like really beautiful exhibition space now that we can use, we've always been like really mindful about visual representation of Indigenous peoples within the city. So we wanted our building to like really reflect who we were as Indigenous people, Indigenous collective, but also make it a little bit more contemporary within the design, but also to just like reflect those like important elements to us, one of which is being water, and reflecting and thinking about how the community is like centered within our space. So we worked with architects to have this reflective exterior cladding. And we always kind of knew when we first opened the building, it was just that brown brick below, but we knew we were always going to put murals there. And we spent some time to select artists. We have Kenneth LaValle, who has the water ripple, that really pixelated water ripple, which he called Dotsitsiwan. And the ripple actually starts at the heart. So as people walk by, an average size person, the ripple starts where their heart is across as they're walking across the space. And then we also invited Michelle Sound to come in then this one just came up this summer. And this one is called Kukum Star Blanket Sky. And once again, she didn't grow up here, but her family's from here. And she actually spent a lot of time in this neighborhood with her Kukum. And she just really kind of wanted to honor their time. And we really wanted to bring in a lot of our sky and star people stories within the building as well, to kind of think about how the land impacts the way that we kind of view ourselves and the way we do our exhibitions and programming. Something that was kind of presented to us as an opportunity was in 2021, there's a vacant lot that's right next to the gallery, and we were invited to do something within that space, which is a really welcome opportunity for us. So one of our core members, who's a Métis artist and architect, Tiffany Shaw, designed this garden space in the planters with some very specific like elements within it, kind of once again thinking like circular or this ripple effect, like inspired by Kenneth LaValle's mural. But it was also based on the late Mike McDonald, who's a Mi'kmaq artist, Butterfly Medicine Gardens. And he had a garden here in 1999 at the Edmonton Art Gallery before it transformed into the Art Gallery of Alberta. So we ended up taking a lot of like that historical archive images and information that we've had from his previous gardens and started introducing elements of it while expanding on it, kind of to meet the needs of the space and also kind of think about, the needs of the community that we're kind of located within. And also like not knowing how permanent this space was going to be, we just wanted to make sure that there was a lot of elements that wasn't going to create like long-term, a long-term like impact in terms of like we wanted to be more sustainable. That's what I'm trying to say. So we went with like hay bale beds, something that we knew would disintegrate over time, and these oak barrels, which were the original garden was planted in these oak barrels. So we were really excited to kind of work with Finding Flowers, who does a revitalization project, and to also bring in more artists. So this space is now actually in its third year. It's lasted longer than we originally thought it was going to, but it became just this huge, really important space within the community for folks to kind of come and gather. Like it's open 24/7. We don't dictate who's allowed or not allowed to be in this space. We provide a lot of community programming in this space. We've done beading workshops, high tanning workshops, as you can kind of see here. And we've done like printmaking workshops, had writers present in the garden, music performances, really anything. So we wanted this space to really be activated by the community in a way for us to present our work and access some of these teachings in an urban setting. So this space was really taken over by the community, and because they've just loved it so much, that it's just something that we continue to present each year and continue to challenge ourselves to grow it and program it as much as they want it to be programmed. And I just thought I'd end with a little tobacco plant, because that was actually from the seeds last year, and it just grew so well in the space, and people come and harvest it and use it, which is really wonderful for us to see. Yeah, so I probably have a ton more I could say, but I'll leave it there for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. That was really powerful, really amazing, wonderful to see. You picked up a lot of the themes I had been thinking about, but it obviously took much further. So thank you so much for that. That was really amazing. And finally, and of course, this order was completely random. So in the classic tradition of last, but definitely not least, Naomi. You are muted though.
Thank you for that, Neil, and thanks for the introduction. Of course, I'm muted. I'm not going to show a presentation today, but I am going to talk about a few things. I think just through the introduction, I've been fortunate to work in this profession in architecture and design since graduating from high school, which seems like a very long time ago. Through all of these years, it's really afforded me the opportunity to explore many different roles. As was mentioned, I've had experiences in design and practice, professional regulation, pathways to registration, advocacy, communications and marketing, business operations. Now I'm in project management. And through all of these experiences over this time, there's a few observations. And one of them is that this is, right now, is a really interesting time. It seems that the design world, the industry, policy, and public sentiment are converging around an awareness and a coming to terms with a number of intersecting realities. And those realities, I can list a number of them, might be Indigenous rights, the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, diversity, whether it be culture, diversity of sex and gender, cultural, other diversities, cognitive diversities. I could go down a list. People have recognized that there's a real need for accessibility and all that accessibility means. The march of climate change is becoming obvious, I think, to everyone, and there is now an urgency in implementing what has been talked about for years around sustainable design and sustainable living, not just sustainable design, but how do we live our lives? Of course, the pandemic has raised a number of issues and challenges and awareness around things like reconciling and addressing economic inequalities, the importance of restoring injustices. These have translated into design awareness and I think a heightened consciousness. And the public space that, we've been fortunate to be taking a look at a lot of urban submissions of late, but public space in support of a lot of these challenges, as well as year-round human connection and creating opportunity, becoming a catalyst for change, all of which rotate around an inclusive approach, an approach to safety. Those are some of the things that I think we're seeing right now. And certainly, enduring the Edmonton Urban Designer Awards, I think many of the most successful works that we saw really demonstrated how designers are coming to terms with all of these convergencies through the design of the buildings and the spaces that they've been presenting. I have been here in the city. It's hard to believe I moved here just a little over 30 years ago. And Edmonton then was a different city than Edmonton is today, for sure. For those of you who are watching, I mean, Edmonton then was still in the throes of the recession of the early 90s. It was just coming out of a rather depressed state in terms of how the urban core actually functioned. At that time, Edmonton's downtown rail yards and its tracks were still in place. Some people might recall, fondly or not fondly, the Rat Hole, which was an underpass at the intersection of 109th and 104th Avenue, which created between the rail yards and the underpass quite a divide between the north and south side of the tracks. 104th as a trajectory had not been developed. It was mostly a series of open fields, parking lots, abandoned rail buildings. That's what lined the streets. MacEwan University was actually just being completed at that time. The whole warehouse district in downtown Edmonton really hadn't taken off, and at that time, I remember the opening of the Excelsior Lofts, which was, opening with quite a fanfare. It was one of the first warehouse buildings to be renovated into condos in downtown Edmonton. But up until that time, there was not a lot of habitation of Edmonton's downtown. So, those were some of the things that were happening at that time. Jasper Avenue, the main street, the main drag in Edmonton was, I want to say marginally livelier than it is today. But West Edmonton Mall had been built in the early 80s, so it was already a main street that was in decline. And our LRT at that time really just connected downtown to a North End line. There was no connectivity across the river, south, east, or west really at that time. And the river valley, while always there, had not really been maximized. So when you take a look 30 years ago, I remember moving here thinking, oh, Edmonton's a great city with so much potential, if only. And so flash ahead 30 years and you realize how much has been achieved in this city since that time. There's been significant development and significant planning initiatives. There's been the Edmonton Capital City Plan, Capital Boulevard has been put in place, an arts district has now been formalized and created. The LRT has expanded and continues to expand to the northeast, southeast, and west of the city. There's a growing and ever increasing connectivity to the river valley with the development of urban trail systems, pedestrian bridges, connectivity to allow people of all abilities to get down into the river valley. There's a number of recreation opportunities that have sprung up. MacEwan University and Northwest College have developed major educational hubs in the downtown core, which brings a whole other energy to the area and people living in that area. The ICE district, which was never the ICE district, now has brought a new arena, entertainment, hospitality, commercial retail, office and residential mixes to an area that was for the most part underutilized and vacant lands. Of course, the warehouse development into housing has continued to progress. There's been densification in our downtown and the surrounding areas, and we're seeing a lot of peripheral mature neighborhood housing and infill growth, again, increasing density close to the core. All of these activities, I think, have provided a lot of opportunities for businesses to grow and communities and neighborhoods to develop, strengthen, and flourish. I think today, 30 years later, culturally, Edmonton is thriving in many ways. It's got a thriving arts culture. It's got a thriving foodie culture. Lots of local entrepreneurs with food and beverage establishments, local markets, local pop-ups. And of course, we see an increase in a number of year-round festivals and events that have activated the city and really charted the course for Edmonton to be a livable and an engaging city. So when I look back, over the time that I've lived here, which seems long but seems short at the same time, it is quite a transformation. I think post-pandemic, the city of Edmonton is certainly getting back on track. And, just a reflection and taking a look at all of the submissions and some of the work that was presented to us, I think it's really optimistic to see what the future does hold for this city. And I think that's the note I'm going to close on. And hopefully it will lead us to some discussion about topics today.
That was wonderful, Naomi. You covered a lot of the topics I wanted to ask all of you about, and I think I'll start with a really broad one. Having had the benefit of seeing the submissions and thinking and reflecting on them, as well as your own experience, I'm curious, sort of your general observations, particularly anything that was like, wow, that's really surprising, or wow, that's very familiar. Like I see, Naomi, you mentioned a few of these things within these submissions. I recognize in Edmonton that's evolving. That's very much a work in progress, as all cities are. But that's sort of cohering around some of these really challenging intersecting realities. So on that note, I'll maybe go from Naomi back through Becca to Marta on your sort of general impressions of the award submissions.
I'm not sure if you wanted to start with me, Neil, but
Naomi, we'll go back through the other way.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think that overwhelmingly, and the submissions, like I say, they were very diverse in what was submitted. I think that was the first part, but there were some trends that I think were really positive. And one, clearly there is a move afoot at the city to support, I want to say, plans and projects which really start something, that really catalyze something happening in areas of the city where there needs to have something happen. So I know there were a number of projects in some of our transitional areas that were really powerful, really meaningful, of very high quality design and thoughtfulness, that spoke to community engagement, that were trying to be reflective of the place and actually make a point of, as I say, starting something in a meaningful way. So I think that was something that I think I noticed as a trend in some of the submissions that we did see, which I thought was quite positive. And I'll let Marta and Becca also comment.
Pardon me. I mean, it was like a really new experience for me, honestly. I come from, curatorial and artwork. So like a lot of what I was comfortable speaking to was the public artwork. So it was a lot of new information for me. And I was like so thankful to be able to listen to like the fellow jury members and their experiences and expertise. And I really learned a lot from the whole process. But having just like grown up in this city, I was just really, really excited and surprised about like the diversity of applications. I'm, within my practice, I do work with like more marginalized groups. And I do think like visibility of other cultures is extremely important. It's important to have representation of different voices and different perspectives within our urban centers. And, I did see a reflection of that, which was really exciting for me, and I think the power behind that is, the young folks coming up and, being able to see themselves reflected in these spaces can really transform, how they present themselves in the future. I mean, even for myself, growing up and learning about Douglas Cardinal and the work that he was doing, like really did actually switch things in my mind, that I was able to create work and access space in a different way as like an Indigenous person. And so I think that's really important. And I think it's really important not to just have Indigenous voices, but also like different communities, like from the immigration communities, and to have, because they've made this place their home, they have active communities. It's really important to see them visible as well. So I was really surprised by that, really happy to see that, because I don't remember seeing a ton of it growing up. But also just how fun some of these spaces are. And I think it is kind of really reflective of this like youthful playfulness. And I think it can really transform how our bodies move through the space, is that, that are more playful and more joyful, and kind of those feelings and how we present ourselves in this space can really change from that.
That's wonderful. Marta, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have to say that I think urban design is alive and well in Edmonton, and I was delighted to see that. I am a bit sorry to see that urban design is taking a backseat to a lot of the planning decisions that are being made in Vancouver right now, with housing affordability being front and center on everybody's mind, and certainly the mantra of the politicians these days. I agree very much with what Becca said about the playfulness, the colorfulness, the enthusiasm that was expressed in these projects that we saw. I was delighted to see the extent of community involvement and how much many of these projects were really embedded in their neighborhoods and fostered by the neighborhoods, and now give a bit of a place in the neighborhood for people to socialize and gather. That was really impressive. We were asked as part of our jury duties to review the new plan and its big moves. And one of the big moves that surprised me, if you talk about surprise, is the idea of the rebuildable city as one of the themes for Edmonton. And I was delighted to see a number of really strong projects that were not from scratch, but redevelopments of a building that already existed in a new and surprising and stronger way. And that idea of adaptation and reuse is at the core of urban design for me. I think urban design is, in part, strongest when it's repairing things, when it's knitting things together, that when it responds to its context and brings things that already exist into a better relationship with the new. And for me, that was a big surprise, because I think of Edmonton as a new city, and to see it having so many adaptive reuse projects was really a strong part of the award submissions.
That's wonderful. Again, there's so much we could talk about. I think I'm going to pick up on one that came up a few times on space and land. And, you know, Edmonton, as the city we know it today, is relatively recent and new, but and spacious, right? We're not a city of dominant physical constraints. We are a city that has expanded out and is now rebuilding with a desire for more infill and more density. But I don't know, any thoughts you may have on the role of space as a design component, recognizing that this is not empty space, that this is a land that has a deep history, a complex ecology, a really interesting spot on the edge of the prairies. And Marta, you had mentioned, you know, beginning with the inspiration of Ian McHarg and starting with an understanding of land. Becca, you certainly talked a lot about space as a component of your work, dialogue with space. And Naomi, you brought into the conversation of a lot of intersecting aspects that are playing off in this space. So maybe I'll just rephrase that to what, having gone through this experience, what's your thinking about the design opportunity in Edmonton and surrounding? And I'll start with Becca, just to pick up. You're the only one who didn't go first.
Yeah, opportunity within space. I mean, I think as we're moving forward, I think it's really important to be really intentional with space. You know, like I said, working like with more marginalized communities, I think there needs to be more activation of their voices within when we're talking about the intention of space. You know, because our worldviews or our views of space can be very different from what the city plans for the space. And how are those like voices being heard within this design process? And are they being heard at the beginning, the middle, or the end? And what's the intention of engaging them within that project? You know, so I think as we move forward, I think we are moving into a time, you know, where it's really critical to be thinking about those intentions and how we are engaging these voices. And I think there's so much opportunity to engage in a really meaningful, powerful way. So different communities feel reflected within the city and the surrounding areas. And they also feel like they can activate these spaces in a safe way. These spaces meet their needs instead of being forced into spaces that may not meet their needs. So I think there's a really, I see a really exciting time on the horizon. I can't share too much about this new project that I'm working on, but something I was really incredibly moved by is I was recently in a meeting about a project and half the people at the table were Indigenous. And that was like the first time that's ever happened in my career. And it was powerful to have that equal voice within that space. And I think moving forward, I know there's like not a ton of Indigenous architects or urban planners, but I think there's also an opportunity to engage with Indigenous people or marginalized people within the way the consultation process happens, to make sure that like you understand what they're saying and that it's reflected within the design. Because I think I know there's intention to be reflective in those conversations within designs, but sometimes they miss the mark if you don't have the history or understand the complexity of the design. So I guess I go caution that moving forward, folks. So there's an opportunity to be really intentional, and I think I think it takes time, and I think it's about relationship building, and it's not going to happen over a few meetings, but kind of encouraging to sit and visit and have a cup of coffee regularly with some folks, stakeholders, to really get to know the needs of that community and how we can best represent them within the city.
That was fantastic. Naomi or Marta, or I'll pick on Naomi first and then Marta.
Well, space is a really interesting question because in the context of Edmonton has a lot of space. It's got a lot of space in the city, and it's got a lot of space around the city. And the question really is, in a lot of cases, what is sprawl? What is, conscientious development? And also what is sustainable? Again, when we start talking about some of the issues of sustainability and climate, is it sustainable to continue to develop Edmonton well beyond its current boundaries, and how far do you go, especially when there is a significant amount of vacant land in the city, whether it be parking lots, abandoned industrial. You can drive down the Calgary Trail or Gateway Boulevard and you'll see countless opportunities for development that just seem to sit there decade after decade after decade. So I think those are a lot of the questions when we start talking about space. When you think about some of the, let's say arguably the great cities, and I'll pick a couple, Montreal and New York City. I mean, they're islands and they have limited land and resource, and densification is a reality. And some of arguably the most interesting neighborhoods, interesting built works have been created because of, having to shoebox something into some cramped space. And that's what people love about a lot of these kinds of cities. So Edmonton could take advantage of that by actually examining all of its vacant land in its many, many neighborhoods and urban location in the downtown, and try and deal with it. So it's a question of, is it the easy way out to go to vacant land on the outskirts? It is certainly harder and more of a design challenge and a municipal challenge and a zoning challenge, a developer challenge to build on the vacant land that already exists in the more urban core of the city. So I think that's the challenge that's ahead of us when we start thinking about it from a number of perspectives. There's also a question as well of, and it links a little bit to what Becca was saying, about all of the populations that live in the city. And there is a bit of a culture of entitlement to certain, I want to call it landowners, quote unquote, and the amount of land they get to own which ultimately means that others who don't own land may not be able to have a footprint in the city. So I think that's another complex reality that we have to deal with. Does everybody get, whatever you want to call it, their acre of land at the expense of others who don't get any? So, those are the things that come to mind when I think about land and space.
That's fantastic. And Marta, to wrap us up.
I think certainly the questions of sprawl are a big challenge, but I see two very heartening trends in the work that we reviewed as a jury. One is the river and the river valley as an iconic landscape for Edmonton, and how it's been enriched over the last few years by the insertion of projects that take advantage of that location and celebrate it. And the other is, as Becca talked about, the active participation of Indigenous designers and artists in the conversation, and the fact that they bring to the table a conversation about a deep understanding of the land that is certainly going to find its way into projects as they go forward.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time. Any last comments, Peter or Cynthia? This is I wish this could go on much longer. This is rich in revelation.
It was wonderful. I'll ask Cynthia if she wants to add anything else. Then we probably should wrap things up.
No, that was really excellent. Thank you so much, Marta, Naomi, and Becca.
And we will get to see what the jury has chosen as the exemplars of this past couple years on, was it November 26th, Peter? 24th.
24th, yeah.
Yeah. Looking forward to that. And any final comments, Peter?
Well, I would just say to obviously Neil, you and Cynthia, thanks for your work guiding this. Marta, Becca, and Naomi, thanks for your insight. And for people still on the call, we are hosting a gala on Friday, November 24th at 7 o'clock, and we'll be very shortly on the awards website having details about how people can get free tickets to that event. So thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Edmonton Design Week.
Get out there and enjoy Edmonton Design Week.
Indeed.
Lots of great events, edmontondesignweek.com, I believe.
Good plug. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all. I want to